some of the work that's been done in certain aspects of literary theory, particularly post-structuralist literary theory, people like Barthes, Foucault, mind's gone blank. But anyway, the continental philosophers, basically, as applied to literary theory, make distinctions between, or make interrogations of this concept of the text, that word text. And of course, to precursor anything else, in this context, text doesn't simply mean a line of words, although that's the prototypical or paradigmatic form. It can be anything that can be read. But for the sake of this, perhaps the prototype is the best example to draw from. The idea of the text as a line of words. And, Barthes reminds us that when we're talking about text, we're talking about something that springs from the same origins as textile and texture, something that's woven. But there's also ultimately kind of linear. The warp and the woof of that text are unbroken threads, after all. And when we are embraced by a conventional text, a novel, let's say, or a film out of Hollywood, then we're invited to attach ourselves to a thread and follow it where it leads. It's a linear process, a one-dimensional linear process, one might say. And Barthes, in some of his writings, worked to text, death of the author, and two other things, and also Stanley Fish, actually, in some of his writings, talk about this other view of text, which in some ways was prescient for developments in technology, particularly hypertext and ultimately World Wide Web developments. And I think this term hypertext, which I think was originally coined by Ted Nelson at MIT, it's a really interesting term, because what it suggests is, well, first for me it suggests like something science fiction, like relationships in space and hyperspace that you find as a staple in nuts and bolts science fiction. It suggests a different dimension that one can enter in order to proceed with an engagement with text, which doesn't simply follow the lines of warp and woof. It does something different. If you like, it offers a place to stand, in which one might look down upon that piece of textile, that text, and choose the point at which one wants to enter and the point at which one wants to leave, and maybe even offers the possibility of forging new threads between different points, or one is implicitly forming that connection between different points on the surface of the text. That's implied by this sort of elevated position that you're offered in a dimension which is outside of that surface. So you have this idea of hypertext, a place to stand above it. With hypertext, of course, and here I'm talking about not only the way that Barthes talks about it. He, for example, mentions something like Finnegan's Wake, James Joyce's book, as a kind of textual offering which allows multiple ways of entering and leaving that text. A hyperspatial dimension is strongly recommended, or the adoption of that position is strongly recommended by Barthes and others in relation to a reading of Finnegan's Wake and other texts. I think the film Last Year in Marienbad actually is cited as something that benefits from that lofty position, and some of the piece of writing I came across. But in both that static form and in the technologically developed instantiation of hypertext in the form of CD-ROM-based hypertextual narratives, or the grand hypertext of World Wide Web 1.0, the text that one is looking down on from this elevated hyper position is still relatively static. It's certainly Finnegan's Wake isn't going anywhere. No new lines are being written, no new words are being coined, other than the ones that Joyce originally coined. And although the World Wide Web might be growing, or at least World Wide Web 1.0 might have been only growing, nothing was essentially changing about the structure of the fabric itself. Nothing substantially different. And certainly with something like CD-ROM based hypertext works, hypermedia works, to a large extent, to a dominant extent, the structure is essentially fixed from what is off, and the hyper element is a reflection only of one's position, separate from that dimensional structure, two-dimensional structure, let's say. So both text and hypertext, of course, are completely different, both in terms of technological instantiation and in terms of readership strategies. But in terms of the object, if you like, which is approached, it isn't necessarily that different. Finnegan's Wake is still the same, whether one reads from front to back or whether one chooses to be idiosyncratic or perverse about one's readership strategy. It may be, and here I'm speculating, it may be that one could consider that a possibility of a kind of text, and I think text is probably an inadequate word here, but a kind of text which is more like this river here, which you can't step into twice, which doesn't retain its objective distance from you, which doesn't exist as a kind of flat plane beneath you into which you can dive and move at will, and that will stay politely passive for you, nor will it stay as a kind of thread that one can attach oneself to and follow like the line of a kite to its ultimate conclusion, but which one is already implicated and which is shifting dynamically whilst one is moving, and also which is interpersonal. I mean, I know this is the case with something like wikis and some blogs and some other online facilities, that the surface of the text itself doesn't allow one to take it in at a glance and have that removed objective position to it. One isn't separated into the third dimension in quite that way. Perhaps it's a kind of tesseract in which a five-dimensional hypercube in which one is constantly being posited and constantly positing. Yeah, I can't go any further with that. Yeah, but I'm striving for an understanding of the word text, which distinguishes it from text as a single line, which Barth calls the sort of associated with the author God, this single line of authorized meaning, but which is also distinct from hypertext in its technological understanding, and also in terms of its interpretive readership strategies. Text which is more like a body.